In 1981, when the film crew first stepped onto the old Rhode Island farmhouse, they believed they were adapting a ghost story. What they did not expect was that the local records they uncovered would lead them to a name the town had tried to forget for over a century: Bathsheba Sherman. According to archived church documents and town birth records from Harrisville, Rhode Island, Bathsheba Thayer was born in 1812. She married Judson Sherman in 1844 and moved into a large farmhouse that stood isolated among acres of dense woodland. The house still stands today, weathered, silent, watching. Long before cameras arrived, the land had a reputation. Witnesses later reported that the property had changed hands several times after the Sherman family. Each new owner documented strange disturbances, unexplained smells of decay, broken tools found stacked in precise patterns, livestock dying without visible cause. But the stories always circled back to Bathsheba. The legend most often repeated was simple and brutal. A neighbor entrusted her infant to Bathsheba's care for an afternoon. When the mother returned, the child was dead. An autopsy was conducted. The medical examiner noted a strange puncture wound at the base of the infant's skull, a wound too precise to be accidental. There was no trial, no conviction, insufficient evidence. Yet according to church records, suspicion lingered. Witnesses claimed Bathsheba was seen standing over the infant's body before authorities arrived. One elderly neighbor later told a local historian that Bathsheba had looked proud, not afraid. The death certificate listed the cause as a cerebral hemorrhage. Officially, it was a tragedy. Unofficially, it was something darker. Over the next few years, 3 of Bathsheba's own children died before reaching 7 years old. The causes were recorded as illness, but neighbors began to whisper. Livestock miscarried. Milk curdled overnight. Tools went missing. Fires sparked in fireplaces that had been cold for hours. According to one Baptist minister's notes from 1849, a formal accusation of witchcraft was raised against Bathsheba Sherman by several members of the community. The accusation was dismissed in court, but the stigma remained. The minister wrote that Bathsheba had an unnatural presence and a gaze that unsettled even the most steadfast believer. In 1885, Bathsheba Sherman died at the age of 73. Local legend insists that she climbed to the highest branch of a tree near the farmhouse at dawn, tied a length of rope around her neck, and cursed the land before stepping into the air. Her official death record lists paralysis as the cause. But the tree remained, and the rumors refused to die. Nearly a century later, in 1971, the Perron family moved into that same farmhouse. Carolyn and Roger Perron, along with their 5 daughters, believed they had found a peaceful rural home. The property was large, affordable, and filled with history. They did not know that the history was still alive. From the first night, small things began to happen. Doors opened slightly. Clock stopped at precisely 3:07 a.m. Carolyn noticed that the broom she used each morning was found leaning against the kitchen wall instead of inside the pantry where she had placed it. At first, she blamed the children, but the girls insisted they had not touched it. According to interviews given years later, the Perron daughters described hearing whispers in the walls. Not loud, not threatening, just present. A murmur that seemed to travel through the wooden beams like breath moving through lungs. Roger dismissed it as settling wood. Until the bruises appeared. Carolyn woke one morning with a dark, hand-shaped bruise on her upper thigh. She had no memory of falling or injuring herself. Over the following weeks, more bruises formed, always in places that felt deliberate. The shape of fingers, the pressure of a grip. Medical examinations revealed nothing abnormal. The attending physician suggested stress. But stress does not leave fingerprints. According to witness accounts from the family, the atmosphere inside the house shifted after sunset. The air grew thick. A faint odor of rotting meat would drift through the hallways without warning. The youngest daughter, April, claimed she had befriended a quiet man in the corner who told her not to be afraid. The older daughters reported something different. They spoke of a woman with a long neck, pale skin stretched tightly over sharp features, eyes that seemed too dark, too hollow. The girls said she would stand at the foot of their beds and stare, not speaking, just staring. In 1973, after nearly 2 years of escalating disturbances, Carolyn sought help. Through a mutual acquaintance, she contacted Ed and Lorraine Warren. According to the Warrens' own case files, they were informed that the Perron farmhouse exhibited intelligent haunting activity with possible demonic influence. Lorraine Warren later stated in a lecture that she sensed a dark attachment to the mother. When the Warrens arrived at the farmhouse, Lorraine reportedly felt immediate hostility upon stepping across the threshold. She later described a sensation of being watched by something ancient and territorial. During a preliminary walkthrough, Lorraine paused in the kitchen. Witnesses present claimed she turned pale and whispered a single name: Bathsheba. Over the following weeks, the Warrens conducted multiple investigations inside the home. Audio recordings captured faint knocking sounds responding to questions. Photographs developed with streaks of dark mist hovering near Carolyn. The Warrens believed the entity targeting Carolyn was not merely residual. It was intelligent, focused, possessive. Lorraine concluded that the spirit of Bathsheba Sherman had attached itself specifically to Carolyn, perceiving her as an intruder, perhaps even a rival. According to church consultation notes, the Warrens suggested a seance rather than a formal exorcism. The goal was to communicate and potentially weaken the spirit's influence. The Perron family agreed. On the evening of the seance, the house felt colder than usual. The daughters were instructed to remain upstairs. Only Carolyn, Roger, the Warrens, and a small group of assistants gathered around the dining room table. Candles flickered though no windows were open. Lorraine began to pray softly. Witnesses later reported that Carolyn's breathing grew shallow within minutes. Her posture stiffened. Her hands gripped the arms of her chair with unnatural force. Then her head tilted back. Too far. Roger later stated that his wife's voice changed. It dropped into a tone he did not recognize: rough, strained, older. According to the Warrens' documentation, Carolyn began speaking in a language none of them understood. The sounds were described as guttural, rhythmic, almost ritualistic. The air inside the room shifted. One assistant claimed the smell of decay intensified so suddenly that her eyes began to water. Carolyn's chair started to shake. Not subtly, violently. Roger attempted to grab her, but the Warrens instructed him not to interfere. The candles extinguished simultaneously. In the darkness, something struck the table with force. When the lights were restored, Carolyn was no longer seated. She was suspended slightly above the floor, her body arched unnaturally, her eyes rolled back. Witnesses later insisted they saw her body lift without visible support. Roger broke protocol. He rushed forward and pulled her down. The séance ended abruptly. According to the Perron daughters, their mother did not fully regain consciousness for several hours. When she did, she had no memory of what occurred. But something had changed. The activity intensified after that night. Scratches appeared on Carolyn's back in sets of 3. Kitchen knives were found embedded in wooden countertops. The daughters reported seeing the pale woman more frequently, closer, angrier. One night, Christine, one of the older daughters, claimed she saw her mother standing in the hallway in total darkness, staring at her. When Christine called out, Carolyn did not respond. Instead, she slowly turned her head and whispered a name that did not belong to anyone in the house: Bathsheba. The following morning, Carolyn denied ever leaving her bedroom. According to Lorraine Warren's later testimony, this marked the shift from oppression to attempted possession. But the deeper investigation into Bathsheba Sherman's life would reveal something that even the Warrens had not initially uncovered. Because the court records about the infant's death were incomplete. And hidden within a stack of church correspondences from 1849 was a letter that described an event far more disturbing than a suspected murder. An event that suggested Bathsheba may not have been acting alone. The letter was never meant for public eyes. It was written by Reverend Augustus Kenyon in late October of 1849 and addressed to a senior clergyman in Providence. The paper, now brittle with age, described a private meeting that took place inside the Sherman farmhouse after sunset. According to the letter, several townspeople had gathered outside the property after hearing what they described as ritual chanting coming from the barn. The sounds were low and rhythmic, carried by the wind across the fields. At first, they assumed it was an animal in distress. But the chanting did not stop. Reverend Kenyon wrote that when he entered the barn with 2 witnesses, he found Bathsheba kneeling in the center of a crude circle marked in ash. A small animal carcass lay at her feet. Its body was drained of blood, though no wound was clearly visible in the lantern light. She was not startled by their arrival. She did not attempt to hide what she was doing. Instead, according to the Reverend, she looked directly at him and said, "You should not have come." The Reverend claimed that the air felt heavy, almost electric. He described an overwhelming sense of pressure in his ears and a ringing that would not fade. One of the witnesses fainted. The other began to pray uncontrollably. The letter ended with a warning. "This woman does not fear God. She fears nothing, and I believe she has pledged herself to something that does not dwell in heaven." The correspondence was filed away. No formal charges followed, but within months, the infant in her care was dead. When Lorraine Warren uncovered this letter nearly a century later, it reinforced her conviction that the spirit in the Perron farmhouse was not simply restless. It was intentional, and it had chosen Carolyn. After the failed seance, the Perron family reported that the entity's behavior grew more calculated. It no longer relied on sudden disturbances alone. It began isolating Carolyn. Witnesses later reported that she would lose blocks of time. She would find herself standing in rooms without remembering how she arrived there. Once, she woke in the cellar with dirt beneath her fingernails and no recollection of descending the stairs. The cellar had become a focal point. It was there that Lorraine sensed the strongest presence. The walls were lined with old stone. The air was damp and colder than the rest of the house. The Warrens believed that if any ritual had taken place on the property, it would have centered there. One evening, Lorraine stood at the base of the cellar steps with a crucifix in her hand. She later stated that she felt a surge of hatred emanating from the darkness below, not sadness, not confusion, hatred. The Perron daughters began refusing to sleep alone. Andrea, the eldest, documented events in a personal journal. She described hearing footsteps circling her bed at night. Slow, measured, as though someone was studying her. April's imaginary friend stopped speaking. Instead, she began waking up screaming, claiming that the tall lady was angry because Mommy doesn't belong here. Roger's patience began to fracture. He blamed the Warrens for escalating the situation. He demanded that they leave the property permanently. According to some accounts, he physically escorted them off the premises after a heated argument. The Warrens would later state that they were barred from returning. But the entity did not leave with them. In the weeks that followed, Carolyn's condition deteriorated. She grew withdrawn. Her voice occasionally slipped into a tone the daughters described as unfamiliar. During one dinner, she abruptly stopped eating and began muttering under her breath. Christine leaned closer to listen. She later reported hearing a repeated phrase, "This house is mine." Medical professionals were consulted again. Psychological evaluations were conducted. Doctors suggested anxiety, hysteria, possible depressive episodes. No one could explain the scratches that continued to appear. 3 parallel lines, perfectly spaced. According to demonologists, the number 3 is often interpreted as a mocking symbol, a distortion of the Holy Trinity. Lorraine believed the markings were deliberate messages. One night in late 1974, the activity reached a level that the family would never forget. The daughters were gathered in the living room when they heard a loud crash from the kitchen. They found every cabinet door open, every drawer pulled out, the contents scattered across the floor. In the center of the room stood Carolyn, still, her back facing them. Andrea called out softly. Their mother did not respond. Instead, she began speaking again in that altered voice. Low, measured, almost amused. Witnesses later stated that the temperature dropped so sharply that their breath became visible. The kitchen light flickered, then shattered. Carolyn turned slowly. Her eyes did not appear to focus on her children. She smiled. Not warmly, but knowingly. And then she whispered, "She watches you when you sleep." The daughters fled the room. Roger managed to restrain Carolyn until the episode passed. When she regained awareness, she was confused and exhausted. The next morning, Andrea discovered something in the cellar. Carved into one of the wooden support beams was a symbol she had never seen before. It resembled a crude sigil, intersecting lines forming a distorted star. The wood appeared freshly gouged. Roger insisted no one in the family had gone near the beam. The daughters swore the carving had not been there the day before. Local historians later compared the symbol to markings found in obscure 19th-century occult texts. While no direct evidence connected it to Bathsheba Sherman, the similarity was unsettling. According to Lorraine's private notes, the spirit's strategy was clear: break the mother, fracture the family, reclaim the house. But the most disturbing detail would emerge years later. In interviews conducted decades after leaving the farmhouse, Andrea Perron revealed that the Warrens' version of events was incomplete. She stated that the séance was not merely an attempt at communication. It was meant to provoke. Lorraine believed that forcing the entity into manifestation would weaken it, but instead, it enraged it. Andrea described her mother's transformation during the ritual as something beyond possession. She claimed that at one point, Carolyn's body arched backward so violently that a cracking sound echoed through the room. And in that moment, Andrea said she saw a shadow detach from the ceiling and descend toward her mother. Not a full figure, not a solid form, but a density in the air, a shape without light. After the Warrens were forced to leave, no formal exorcism was ever performed on the Perron home. The family remained there for nearly a decade. Over time, the intensity lessened, not because the presence vanished, but because, according to Andrea, it got what it wanted. Carolyn eventually regained stability. The daughters grew older. The entity's manifestations became less violent, more subtle. Whispers replaced screams. Cold drafts replaced physical force. When the parents finally moved out in 1980, they did not hold a farewell gathering. They did not look back at the house as they drove away. Years later, when filmmakers began adapting the story for cinema, the legend of Bathsheba Sherman was reshaped into something dramatic and theatrical. But the real accounts remain quieter, colder. There is no documented proof that Bathsheba murdered an infant. No court conviction. No official confession. Yet church letters describe ritual behavior. Witnesses describe unnatural presence. A family describes years of psychological torment centered around a single name: Bathsheba Sherman. The tree where she allegedly ended her life no longer stands. Storms brought it down decades ago. But the farmhouse remains. Subsequent owners have reported disturbances they refuse to detail publicly. Paranormal investigators continue to request access. And according to one former resident who spoke anonymously in 2005, there is still a room in the house where the air feels different, thicker, as if something is waiting. The official records may never confirm the darker rumors. History rarely preserves the full truth of isolated accusations. But when examining the letters, the bruises, the witness statements, and the decades of consistent testimony, one unsettling possibility remains. If Bathsheba Sherman did pledge herself to something beyond this world, it may have honored that pact long after her death.